Hello, my name is Michael Klein. I'm in the Department of Marketing and Business Analytics at San Jose State University. I have been working with Peter Jackson at the Singapore University of Technology and Design, Jack Muckstadt at Cornell, and Walt Beedling at Cayuga Partners. And we've been following the leadership of Nathaniel Hupert at Weill Cornell Medicine. We've been supporting the development of tools to assist hospital administrators to estimate the hospital caseloads and critical resources needed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We have been developing a system called the Cornell COVID Caseload Calculator with Capacity and Ventilators, the C5V. Originally, we created a spreadsheet version of the C5V, and that model is still available on the Weill Cornell Medicine website. Since then, we've recently created a new version of the C5V, the C5V Online, and we're grateful to be able to host this for you at San Jose State University. The website it's available at is https://covid19.sjsu.edu. Now, the online version of C5V does everything that the spreadsheet version of C5V does. And then we've also added a few additional features to C5V Online. We're looking forward to getting your feedback on the online version of C5V and also encourage any ideas you may have on some features that we could add to the C5V to make it even more useful for you. Let's consider some of the questions we might be curious of when using a model like the C5V. So for example, at the beginning of an outbreak, we'd be particularly interested in knowing which epidemic curve are we on? Another question would be, when will the epidemic actually peak? Of course, around the peak, we want to know and every day leading up to it and then afterwards, what will be the caseload at our local hospital in the coming weeks? What type of resources will we need in terms of beds? So, for example, in critical care, how many ICU beds do we need? How many other beds do we need to take care of the patients? In New York City, we were concerned about ventilator shortages. How many ventilators will we need? What will be the caseload and critical resource requirements if there is a second wave? Now, the question related to a second wave is a newer question, but it's a new feature that we've added to the C5V Online. In this model, we take a structured approach to hospital resource planning. Initially, this is going to describe all of the inputs that are required in the model. Now, we do give default values for all of these inputs, but it is your responsibility to go in and change these values to make it suitable for the analysis that you're conducting. So in the first step, what's of interest is the population that you're serving. So now in your analysis, you might be looking at a single hospital, you might be looking at a network of hospitals, or perhaps it's an entire region or entire state, or perhaps an entire nation, entire country. So in either case, it would be important to specify the population that you're looking at. Now, this population should also be stratified based on different age groups. So we allow the input for that because it would impact the COVID-19 cases considerably, as we've had a different proportion of cases occurring in elderly compared to younger people, for example. Now, for the next stage, the other thing is, what is the attack rate? So what proportion do we expect to become infected, or the infection rate? And then out of those that are infected, what proportion are symptomatic, and what proportion are going to be required hospitalization? And then next, out of those that are actually going to require hospitalization, another question is about the critical care hospitalization rate. Now, this is also stratified based on age cohort. And we also have in here different scenarios, which is guided from CDC in the United States, where we have different age cohorts and segmentations for the different proportions that are going to be there. All these parameters are available through the C5V online or the C5V spreadsheet version as well. Now, the next step relates to the epidemic curve. Now, we talked about in the previous slide. So here's where you would set the peak day and the duration or the shape of the curve that you expect. And so it can go through different exercises, modeling exercises to see what would happen with different shapes and different peaks or different parameters up till now. And so this is where you would select it. And then with the C5V online, you could also in this step decide whether or not you would like to model a second wave and then set the appropriate peak day or duration. We also provide the option to upload an empirical distribution for the epidemic curve, if you wish to use that. In addition to these, all of these parameters, which we believe are input parameters related to the hospital's capacity needs, we then need to think about the length of stay in the hospital. So for length of stay for medical wards, for surgical wards, which we group together, and then we have the ICU. So the major wards and then the ICU wards. What are the different lengths of stay that we can predict? A minimum, a maximum, and we have a distribution that we'll take from that. In addition, what proportion are what are the fatality rates for each of these different categories of patients? And finally, an optional step is to think about a specific limited capacity and say, well, how many resources do we have? How many beds do we have? How many ICU beds do you have? How many ventilators do you have? And then from this, we can do analysis to determine how many possible deaths can be due to shortages in ventilators, shortages in ICU beds, or denied access to the hospital. Okay, so at this point, let's begin the demonstration going through from this website, https covid19.sjsu.edu. Okay, going to access the system, https covid19.sjsu.edu. Note that https is required. It is a secure site. After selecting this, we get directed to this page. This is the first page. There's a login screen here. So first time, click to sign up, just select the sign up button. Now, email and password are required. All the other fields here are optional. It is helpful to provide support to have your information, company, title, phone, and your first name and last name, but it is optional. The only required fields here are email and password. I'm just going to go back to the main screen since I've already signed up. So I'll log in using my account. The YouTube video that you're watching here, the link would be set up here. There is also a link to documentation provided. Walt Beedling is coordinating support, so Walt's email address and phone number is provided here. And there's also information about us, about the members of the team at the bottom of the page. Okay, now I'm ready to log in to the system. I'm going to put in my email address, password, and select login. Okay, here we are on the main page. It's organized in 3 areas. We have the header at the top. The top includes a profile link where you can change the information that you set up and sign up, like your first name, last name, or your company, and so on. You can change your password or log out. The majority of the information on the page is on the left-hand side and the right-hand side. The left-hand side is organized so that we have the model input there, and then the page is organized so that we have the model output on the right-hand side. The model output includes a series of graphs, and then there's also a download option here, which allows you to download all of the information into a Excel spreadsheet. And this includes the graphs, it includes a number of the numbers in the output, and also from the input. This is quite similar to the spreadsheet version of C5V, where there is an output worksheet. This is the same information that's provided with this option, including the additional features that are in the C5V online. So you can extract to Excel and carry on with your analysis in Excel as well to produce additional output as you see fit. So now this system comes by default with two scenarios set up for you automatically with all the parameters with default values. It's of course up to you to update these values for your particular situation to have the correct values that you want to consider in your modeling exercise for various scenarios. So one scenario you'll have will be called default S1, and the other one will be called default S2. The 1 and 2 refers to the versions of the parameters that were provided. The original parameters were provided by the CDC in the United States. There were different age ranges. So there were 5 age groups in CDC, the original version, and then the newer version came out with 7 age ranges. So you can work with either version that you like. The spreadsheet version of C5V only had CDC version 1 with the 5 age ranges. Here we've allowed for the option to use the 7 age ranges instead. And so that's what we're seeing here, these 7 different age ranges, and the population for your catchment area should be updated here. Now these default scenarios are for modeled with information from New York City. You also may want to update all of this information for your catchment area. What I suggest to do to start is to actually save a copy of the scenario. That way you won't be changing the default, you'll just be changing your own version. Having said that, your version of default S2 is your very own. All the information that you have here is local to you and you only. Nobody else will see your information. Right now, I'm just going to create a copy of this. I'm going to call it demo S2. And then I click save. And when I click save, it's actually going to create a copy of everything that's within default S2, all of the parameters. And so now I have default S2. And let's say I want to use a different population. I'm going to give it a new name, which is going to be my demo place, let's call it. And then to save that, I just click tab, and it's going to create the new population called demo place and associate that in demo S2 scenario. Okay, so let's say I'm using CDC version 2 and I want to change some of the population. You would change for your catchment area. Well, let's say it's quite similar for some reason. Probably it would be quite different, but let's go ahead and just add 500 to the 0 to 19 age group. And then I click Save Population to ensure that those numbers are saved in the demo place population. So it says population updated right above. So there we confirm that the population has been updated. Okay, so that's our step 1. We just have to set up the catchment area for our population. Again, that can be for your single hospital, it can be for a hospital network, it can be for a region, can be for a state, can be for a whole country. That's up to you depending on the analysis that you're performing. Okay, now let's go on to step 2. Now these steps model much of the information that we were discussing in the PowerPoint slides. So here's where you will set the attack rate or the infection rate and then the percentage of people that will be symptomatic. So here, let's say we might assume that that number is higher. Let's set it to, let's say, 55%. Well, it's just a matter of updating with these drop-down menus. Let's say we want, say, percent symptomatic. We think it's maybe lower. Well, we just change that here, and it's as simple as just to update the parameters. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and go to step 3. Now at this point, this is where we're setting up the proportion of people who we believe will require hospitalization. This is the case hospitalization ratio. And this is based on the modeling parameters from the CDC. We've adjusted these numbers slightly and you can adjust them further as you see fit for your situation, and then just click the Save CHR button. The CDC modeling parameters also included the critical care hospitalization fraction, or the CCHF, and these are also included here, stratified by age. Now, the CDC also provided the idea that there would be, you would be modeling considering what if it's a mild situation or a severe situation. So the proportions that you might consider would be updating accordingly. Let's say you thought that there was going to be a lot more ICU needs in the 85 plus, you could just mention that you could just change these parameters to, let's say, 60% and 80% for the severe, and then click Save CCHF. And then if we just look up top, we'll see CCHF has been updated. So those parameters have been updated, and now let's move on to step 4. In step 4, we'll set the epidemic curve that we'd like to use. So the probability density function, we'll use a gamma distribution, or there's another option to have an empirical distribution where you can upload a distribution that you may have using this option. So just like the spreadsheet version, we have the gamma distribution, and the start of curve can be specified. Let's say you want to change this. We can change it to, perhaps in your setting, maybe it started around the 1st of April. So we'll reload the page with that, and you'll see the graph on the right gets updated, the dates automatically. The duration in the spreadsheet version defaulted to 180 days, and that was the only horizon that was possible. We've recently enhanced the online version to have an option to extend the duration of the horizon from anywhere from 180 all the way up to 360 days. Another option here, which is in the spreadsheet version as well, of course, it's to set the maximum which day you believe that's going to occur. Is it going to be 30 days from now, or from the start of the curve, or 45 days, 60 days, 75 days, or 90 days? So if I choose 30 days, the graph on the right-hand side will update accordingly and shift to the left. You can also change the shape. Let's say you thought it's going to be more of a broad situation. Well, then just select the A type, and then we'll see the curve will become more broad. If you think it's going to be more peaked, then you would choose the perhaps extremely peaked situation, and the chart will be updated accordingly in that situation. So I'm just going to set it back to 60, and the C type. And as mentioned earlier, there's a option to add a second wave. If we wanted to have a second wave, we can select yes instead of no here. And then the parameters for the second wave show up. By default, it's going to have 50% on the first wave and 50% on the second wave, but the proportion of cases can be adjusted according to your analysis of what you want to consider. So if we, for example, think that the worst is yet to come, we might say that it's only been 30% of the cases that have occurred in the first case, and then we'll have a more severe second wave. Or let's say we think it's the opposite situation, where the first wave is the majority of cases. Well, we can set the proportion accordingly on the first wave proportion. Now there's also the parameters for the second wave. We can decide where do we want the maximum to occur, on which day number. And then we can also change the shape of the second curve if we'd like to as well. Now, if you wanted to use an empirical distribution instead of this distribution, it's a matter of going to the empirical option. And then from here, there's a start of curve, and the 180 days is specified here. But then a matter of what you would do is you would need to copy and paste the 180 days the duration, the parameters, and these values should set to 1, and that's going to give the proportion spread along the curve for that time frame. If I go back to gamma, and then we see the parameters as we had before. Another word comment to clarify on this case of a second wave. If you originally had used the system and had only a single wave, and you wanted to have a larger proportion or a larger amount of cases from the second wave, well, then you would need to go back perhaps to step 2, update the infection rate or one of the other parameters so that there is a larger number of cases. What we're doing here with the first and second wave is just taking the overall modeled cases and setting them proportionally according to this first wave proportion and then the second wave proportion being the remainder. Okay, so the system has the flexibility to set this up as you see, as you wish, as you're doing your analysis. Okay, let's go on to step 5. As we continue on to step 5, here's where we're going to specify the length of stay parameters, both for the patients that are being seen in the regular, that require regular care, as in not critical care, so they are perhaps being served in a medical or surgical ward. And then also we have the critical care patients being served in the ICU. We have this grouped in 4 groups. There's the adult and the pediatric separation, and then medical surgical wards and the critical care. So there's a minimum and a maximum number of days that can specify here. And then there's a fatality ratio for each segment that can be specified. The experience that some places experienced were that patients who ultimately died may have had a longer length of stay. So it can have adjustments in the length of stay for the patients that do die. That can be specified here. It can be longer or shorter. And so that's an adjustment that can be made to have different length of stay for survivors versus the proportion of patients that die. The other change to length of stay related to ventilator in the event that unfortunately there aren't any ventilators available and a patient needs to be in critical care and does not get a ventilator, we set the minimum and maximum length of stay for those patients in that situation. In this case, we've set up as a default a very high fatality ratio and then a length of stay adjustment so that the idea is that these patients unfortunately would have a shorter length of stay. But of course, these are values that can be set depending on your situation. And then next we'll go on to the step 6. This relates to the capacity, for the capacitated portion of the model. Okay, so here we have bed capacity, ventilator capacity, and ventilator splitting, which is optional. Okay, so if you have a certain number of medical surgical ward beds, a specified number of critical care beds available, and a specific number of ventilators for critical care, this is where we specify this. And then the average patients per resources, if you're doing splitting, you would increase this number perhaps to 1.5 or 2 or 2.5 or 3 or whatever it might be. And then beds are set by default to 1, but they also had that option to change the number, the patients per resource parameter. Okay, so with that, we've gone through all of the input parameters. The next portion we're going to look at is the output on the right-hand side. Okay, with the output, graphs are provided on the right-hand side. We have a series of different graphs available. There's the expected number of cases that we've been seeing so far. There's the patient daily census or the occupancy in an unlimited capacity situation. And then we also have some graphs on if you had occupancy, if there was a limited capacity. And then a final set of graphs relates to a capacitated situation as well, where you have limited capacity and when do you have some overflow of ICU to regular wards, access is denied, and ventilator shortage deaths where patients cannot get a ventilator. Also have the option to select either pediatric or the adult or all, and then also the option to look at either the mild or the severe situation. So if we go ahead and select severe, for example, here what we're going to see is the scale increased. Before it went up to 5,000 and now it's up to 7,000. So we're seeing this. Another option on here, see every single day you can look and see the numbers that are coming in each of the situation, whether it be the critical care or the medical surgical wards. And if the scale is very different for these and you want to just see one, you can actually click on the bottom and it'll remove the series that you're less interested in seeing. If you want to enable it, you just click it again, or if you just wanted to see one at a time. So that's a possibility with all of these graphs. The other thing that we can do is select the unlimited capacity, the daily census or the occupancy. Of course, this will not match exactly the expected number of cases. So here we have the amount of capacity that's required. In unlimited capacity case, what is the daily census that might require? And so from this graph, you can see what you might need at the beginning of the planning horizon. If, for example, the capacity that's available to handle, is not possible to handle such a large amount, then we would know what would be the amount that we would need to plan for in the severe setting for critical care and for med surg. And you can also look at the mild scenario as well here. Okay, and the next set of charts we have is, let's say you have a limited capacity situation. Okay, then when we look at the occupancy, what's going to happen is here we see we have a limit on the number of med surg beds, and so it gets capped off at the top. So the graphs get cut off like that, and same with the critical care beds. And then in this case, the effective ventilators in use is the same as the critical care beds. So you see one graph on top of the other. Again, if you wanted to just see the effective ventilators, we could just cross out the one that we don't want to see. Or if we didn't want to see, the scale will change according to the graphs that we're seeing we want to look at. Okay, so these options are available. And then the last set of charts, the last graphs are here under the fourth option. So we look at the cumulative overflow situation. So we have different situations for denied access and then overflow ICU, and then we also have ventilator shortage deaths. And so the graphs are showing here on the output side. Okay, and then the last thing though to show, which is quite useful, is this idea of downloading to the Excel all of these, and all of these graphs will come out, and a lot of the information so that you can continue with further analysis. It's just a matter of clicking the download option and it will create automatically an Excel file. Now this Excel file output that's creating, it's not being stored on the server anywhere, it's just being generated for you. You can save it to your computer and do further analysis. Okay, let's take a look at this Excel spreadsheet output file that was generated from the C5V online. This is the C5V output page, is the same name as on the spreadsheet version. But what we're going to see is most of this will be the same as the C5V spreadsheet version, but there'll be some things that are different. For example, the age structure here has 7 age ranges, where this C5V spreadsheet version could only deal with 5 age ranges. We do have here also that chart that we showed in the presentation for a series of different potential curves and what that looks like. We have showing here from the CDC mild and severe parameters what has been specified, the adjustments that were made related to critical care and hospitalization ratios compared to the CDC parameters. And then we have the parameters. In this case, we have a first and a second wave. So another thing, of course, that's been added here is the second wave parameters, both the day for the max admissions and also the shape of the epidemic curve in both, and then also the first wave proportion is shown here. In addition, our input parameters related to the length of stay are included here, and a calculation for the mean length of stay, and then the length of stay adjustment that can occur for the case of patients that have the ultimately that die. In addition, we'll have here our scenario output. So our simulation here then ran in this case this number of symptomatic patients, which was 22% of the total catchment area. And then we have information about hospitalization in the mild and severe, and then fatality rates, the numbers, the ventilator shortages, fatalities that relate to the capacitated case. We have detailed results provided on the mild situation, the total number admitted, the peak admissions, the day of peak admissions, the peak hospital census, the day of peak census, the total deaths, and the total discharges. And then the same thing for the severe. So all these details are here. I have even more information about specifying just on the adult cases and looking at the medical surgical and then ICU and critical care, and to see where the maximums occur. And then also the series of graphs are also included and generated in this Excel spreadsheet. So we have for the mild scenario for adult and then for pediatric. And then here we have the patient daily census for adult and then for pediatrics. And then we have the limited capacity case here for mild. And then we have the unlimited capacity for severe. And interestingly enough, here we don't have any cap on the second wave, whereas there is a capacity issue, it seems, on the severe situation. And then if we go down and we look and we see the shortage deaths and in this and these other things like cumulative overflow ICU admissions and access denials, we can see the graphs that are included here. And all of the information that's used for those graphs, all the data is also copied below in the spreadsheet. So there really is a lot of information that is available to you in the spreadsheet output that you can then take and use and do further analysis and customize charts for whatever report that you might be working on producing. So this is the end of the demonstration. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to learn on this. Again, we're very excited to get your feedback and to help you as much as we can. If you have any additional features or comments or questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. We look forward to hearing from you, and also, of course, we look forward to the end of this pandemic. Thank you very much, and all the best.